So the Gender-Based Violence and Femicide Response Fund says progress has been made in the fight against what's actually described in this country as a second pandemic. That's gender-based violence. The fund was launched by President Cyril Ramaphosa, you might remember, back in 2021 to help find the scourge of GBV. In its report, the fund reveals that more than 17,400 survivors received support across its programs. So let's unpack the progress that's been made, at least insofar as what's contained in the report, bringing the chairperson of the GBVF Fund, that's Dr. Judy Dlamini, who's with us in our studios this morning. Great to see you, Doc. Thanks very much indeed for popping by.
Thanks for having me, and good morning.
Lovely.
Good morning to your viewers. Thanks.
Thank you once again. And it's an incredibly important story to cover this, even in the absence of, moments of outrage that typically bring this issue back into the forefront. This money, when it was dispersed, at the time there were concerns that you can't throw money at the problem, at something like gender-based violence. But progress has been made. Take us through, in that context, what your approach was in trying to help some of these survivors.
Right. It's true. And I just want to start by saying maybe it's the first pandemic, gender-based violence and femicide, because it predates COVID. And it's a pandemic that's with us all the time till we break the neck of it. As a fund, it was important for us to do our homework, We've only been around for 18 months. In that 18 months, a lot had to be done. One of the issues we had to address is when SAPS reports about the hotspots, it's 30 hotspots, but we know it's more than that. So we went to academics. We work through partnerships because we haven't got enough money. So we actually discovered it's more like 40. So we were clear that the CBOs, the majority of them, have to be in the areas where it's hotspots because the need is highest. So we knew that you had to address that. We had to address for geography, rural, peri-urban, your squatter camps, urban, because most of the time you'll find that especially people who come from provinces that tend to be rural, they don't get access to funding. So we covered all provinces. We covered hotspots. And at the end, we had 110 CBOs. We were only able to fund 108 to still assisting the other two because with the funding, there is figuring. We have to make sure that we account to the funders to say this is where your money went and this is what it did. We went further than that and we said we need intermediaries. So we selected 4. And why intermediaries? Because there is Dlamini in that small area who does excellent work, but she doesn't want to figure. She doesn't do it because she wants money. She does it because for the love of it. But she needs resources because we always say you can't use money. You can't throw money to solve problems. But guess what? We need money. Oh, yes, money matters. It matters. It certainly does. So we actually tried to be quite comprehensive. We call it spreading the tentacles of help. And the other area that was important to us is mental health, because that's the other issue that as a country, it's swept under the carpet. Things have changed a bit, but they need to change more. So you'll find that quite a significant proportion of the CBOs that we supported also handle mental health, and that matters to us. Yeah. So it's a long way to go, but we've made progress. Absolutely. And just to make sure that everybody's on board with what we're speaking about, explain to us what CBOs are, and as you do that, perhaps also outline to us how you're measuring your progress, because I think that is going to be important for people who feel like we're finally even putting a dent, can I even say, on the scourge of gender-based violence? We are very aware that the problem is huge, but small chunks eating away at a problem matter. The second thing is that CBOs are community-based organizations. Right. They are grassroots, they're on the grassroots. That is where the core face of this is happening. 1, 2, we do more than disperse funds, like the funds that we've allocated for the first call, which is over 2 years, is 69 million rand. It's not a lot, but it's something. And in the first disbursement, first year, it's around 39 million rand. But we do more than that. We partner with people. As you may know, the response fund is a temporary measure before the council comes on board. But before the council comes on board, we need to do a lot of work. part of that work, over and above funding CBOs, is to have relationships, to form networks, to make gender-based violence and femicide everyone's problem. JSE, for instance, has been a very good partner to us. They've assisted us with going to some of these CBOs to hear their stories, record them on video. Why do we do that? So that we expose them for future funding. Because when we go on, we want to expose as many CBOs to funding as possible. 1, 2, we want a conversation with the private sector. We hosted a panel which was actually hosted by our CEO, Dlamini, to talk about the new sexual harassment, the C-190 bill that talks to sexual harassment at work, which is broader than what it used to be. And we're starting to have a conversation to say, we understand the issues around sexual harassment. And let's talk. Do you have a policy in your workplace? And how do you implement it? What does it mean to have recourse if you actually intimidate women? Because sexual harassment is not just about sex. It's intimidation, right. It's humiliation, and so forth. So that's the conversation that we are having. And in the process, we're bringing awareness to the private sector. And we also want them to report on their ESG report to say, this is what we're doing for the eradication of gender-based violence and femicide. And this is the allocation that we are making. But that's not the only thing. We're partnering with the academia. We work with academia to actually look at the terrain and say, is it really 30 hotspots, or is it more? 1, 2, but even the dashboard, we actually said, we want one space where when you look, you can see that these are the numbers. For now, it's based on the numbers that we get from government, but...
Yeah, and there's understandably a lot to be said about this. And, you know, it actually links very well to the next question I was hoping to engage you on. Often, the criticism, even from activists, is that these conversations take place in echo chambers. It's among academics, it's among other activists, it's among people who are leading these CBOs. And because of that, the messaging is actually crystal clear, but it's just not landing in places where it matters.
I couldn't agree.
How do we get that right? Acknowledging your limited resources.
Yes, we're trying to box clever based on the limited resources. We're trying to reach as many different sectors as possible, which brings me to the next one. We started Flip the Switch. It's an activation of, you know, we talk about the woman that is a survivor or victim of gender-based violence and femicide. We don't talk about the perpetrator. And we're flipping the switch and saying, men, be part of this conversation. Do you know of someone who's been violated? Did you do something about it? Because if you don't call out your friend who's abusing the girlfriend, you're an accomplice. So we've activated that campaign, which is at universities. We've spoken to all 26 of them. The last time I checked, 13 were on board. Some have already started. So it's a soft activation where you have young people, men and women, especially young men, confronting the issue of gender-based violence, asking them to look inward, to say, what do you do when you actually...
That's been an issue that academics have raised for quite some time, but what we're struggling with is understanding why programs like that typically don't resonate with the men to which they're targeted. You know, there may very well be an instance where there's an activation that takes place. I bet you, if you were to walk into that room on the day of that activation, ironically, you might find more women there than you would young men.
Sadly. Sadly. Here is the thing, Ayanda. We become comfortable in our way of doing things. We have locker room talk, which is acceptable to men, but it's wrong. To change that takes effort, consistent effort, and more voices. So we shouldn't give up. We should just galvanize more people to see life, to just wear the woman's shoes just for one day. Because when they do, they'll realize that this is hurting women. And it doesn't make sense to hurt the mothers of the nation. It just doesn't. So, but then, social cohesion is a process. We're dealing with a nation that is hurting. We haven't recovered from the hurt that was dealt on us. But we need to be very deliberate, proactively confront the challenges. We haven't got enough time, but there are so many conversations that we try to have with young people, because we need intergenerational conversations. Someone was talking about lobola, and we say, well, it's actually families getting to know each other. And she's like, but why should it be money? And it's like, yeah, why should it be money?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
It's certainly an issue that does touch on various aspects of our lives. But as we round up our chat, you did mention that the fund is kind of like an interim measure that's been put in place. Hopefully there are other ways of ensuring that the kind of work you're working towards breathes and exists on its own post the fund itself.
Oh, definitely. Like as I say, with the partnerships that we are forming, we are one of the things, like the time is not enough, to Tuzela Care Centers. It's one of the best things this country has actually come up with, where you have different departments that are together. So it's a one-stop shop for someone who's been violated. And we are introducing the TCCs as much as possible to potential funders. So I think when we go on, a TCC will stand for the rest of the time because we did something. We introduced them, the national shelters. So we are trying to run as fast as we can while we are here, so that when we're gone, it won't be like just a drop in the ocean. There'll be areas where you'll say, we did that.
Yeah, absolutely. Legacy, hopefully, might live on. Dr. Judy Dlamini, thanks very much indeed for coming to speak to us.
Thanks for having me.
Really do appreciate your time. A story that we simply cannot tire in our coverage of it because of how important it actually is. Judy Dlamini there, speaking to us in her capacity as the chairperson of the GBVF Response Fund. Once again, thanks very much indeed.